Hello, and welcome to the Joline Knits a Lot podcast. My name's Joline, and this is my very first show. I'm so glad you could join me today. This is a podcast about knitting with possible forays into crochet, weaving, maybe cross stitch if I get adventurous, baking, probably mixology. At some point there will be cocktails on this show. And it's my show, and the world is my oyster, and I'm so glad you could join me today. As I said, my name's Joline, and I live in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. We get a lot of different seasons here in Edmonton. It's currently September, and it's cool. The leaves are turning. The mornings are definitely cool. It's a great place to live if you're a knitter because you can wear your hand knit things most of the year. And in fact, for parts of the year, your hand knitted things are essential. So it's great to be living here as a person who loves to knit and knit a lot. I learned how to knit when I was in university. It was a number of years ago now. And my sister-in-law taught me. She's probably the most crafty person that I know. And if I talk to her really nicely, maybe one day she'll be on my show. But she taught me when I was in university, and it gave me something to do with my hands in my downtime. I remember very vividly learning how to knit and knitting my very first stitches and being just fascinated by the way you created the loops by pulling them through the other loops. And the light bulb moment when I figured out what I was doing and how I was doing it. It was just amazing. But it was the mid-90s, and there weren't a lot of resources for a new knitter at that time. I couldn't go on the internet to watch videos on how to learn how to knit or how to purl. So I taught myself a lot. I taught myself through books and through some very helpful yarn store owners in the city where I lived. And over the years, I've continued to knit, challenged myself with new things. I've had the opportunity to learn from some very amazing knitters, and I've also had the opportunity to teach. I've taught some kids how to knit. I've also taught more experienced knitters how to do color work with two hands. And through it all, it's just always amazed me the joy that people get from their knitting, the joy that I get from my knitting, the pride I get when I finish something, when something turns out great and I'm happy to wear it, when somebody asks me, "Did you make that?" I just love it. It makes me feel so accomplished, and it gives me such a thrill. But knitting is also something you turn to when you're sad, or when you're lonely, or when things aren't going your way, or you're frustrated. Knitting is something I do while I'm waiting, while I'm trying to distract myself from other things. And it's brought so much joy to me in my life that I wanted to start a podcast to share that with you. And maybe you can share your joy of knitting with me. So thank you so much for joining me. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so glad that you've joined me today, whether you're a knitter who knits all the time, whether you're crocheting away on your couch, whether you're sitting at your kitchen table with some embroidery or weaving, or whether you're just happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you for joining me, and welcome. As I said, my name's Joline. I am a pharmacist in my day job. I work in a diabetes clinic where I get to help people every day, which is pretty great. I'm married. I've been married for 20 years to my husband, who's also a pharmacist. We have two beautiful daughters who are 14 and 12. And knitting has been my constant companion through driving them to their activities, waiting for them at their activities, watching them do their activities, whether I'm on the side of a soccer pitch, or at a dance competition, or at a band concert, or waiting for them to pick them up or drop them off. Knitting is always with me. As I said, Joline knits a lot, and I hope to share that knitting with you. I guess the first thing I'll share with you today is what I'm wearing. This is the Spark cardigan by Andrea Mowry. It was originally designed to be used or to be knit in worsted weight yarns. Dream State by Spin Cycle, which is a beautiful yarn, and a worsted weight by Magpie Fibers. I personally like a lighter weight fabric. Worsted weight sweaters tend to be a little bit heavy on me. I also feel like they're a little bit bulky on me, so I enjoy slightly lighter weight sweaters. So I opted for Spin Cycle Dyed in the Wool, which is their sport weight yarn, is my contrast color. And my main color is a DK yarn created by Harrisville Designs in their Nightshades range. This is a nightshade with a slightly blue tinge. And the dyed in the wool that I've used, maybe if I extend my bicep, you can see the color range that I've used. It's called Castle, and it starts out in sort of that tealy blue color and transitions through greens and yellows up into pinks. I did a little bit of yarn management with my dyed in the wool. Each skein is unique and beautiful. They're hand wound, well, not hand wound, they're machine wound, but unique. They're hand dyed. So everyone is slightly different. And to make sure that my sleeves were somewhat similar, I had two balls that were in fact quite similar, and so I just went ahead and knit them carefully, or not carefully, just knit them really. And then when I started the body, maybe if I zoom in a little bit, you can see it starts out in sort of like pinky blues and then goes to blues and greens and yellows. But I wanted them all to sort of meet up in the same place. So as the sleeves and the body were joined, they all sort of have this pinky stripe, and then it just goes on from there. The cowl collar, shawl collars always take more yarn than you think they're going to, and I knit and I knit and I knit on this thing, but I have to say, I do love it all snuggled up around my neck, especially on a cool morning. The buttons that I've used were purchased at a Edmonton Fiber Festival a couple of years ago. They're wooden. I believe they're about 1 inch. And I thought that a sweater with this much sort of color going on could handle a bit of an interesting button. And in the end, I have this beautiful cardigan that I'm quite delighted with, and I think I'll be wearing an awful lot this fall and winter. I have a couple other finished objects to share with you. I have this thing for berets. I remember very distinctly being in junior high and having a beret and really feeling that beret. Like I was like, yes, I am a French girl in rural Alberta and I am working this beret, and I would wear it completely like slouched over because I wanted to look as French as possible in my teenage years. Teenage years are hard. Anyway, I'm no longer a teenager. Thank goodness for that. And the older I get, the wiser I get, but I still have a love of berets. This fall, I've seen a lot of berets. I've seen patterns for berets on Ravelry and on Instagram. I've also seen a lot of berets in shopping websites and sort of different lookbooks. And so I thought, I'm gonna make myself a beret. I deserve a beret. Anyway, I used a very plain pattern. This is a pattern from More Last Minute Knitted Gifts by Joel Hoverson. It's a book that I've had for years and years and years, and I knit from it and I love it. There's so many great gift ideas in there, and just great knits, small things where you can use up scraps of yarn, larger projects, just really beautiful things and different options, and lots of hats. Anyway, this is the hat that I knit. It's knit out of some blitzed yarn by Vine. This is some yarn I got years ago, and it's been sitting sadly in my stash waiting for just the perfect project. I think maybe if I hold it up you can see that it's got some beautiful stellina, and it's got a great sort of shine to it. This color is called Gatekeeper, and it's so rich with jewel tones, and I thought it would just make just the right beret for this no longer teenage girl to throw on for cool morning walks in the fall. And I'm pretty happy with it. I like the colors. I love this like streak of hot pink. I love how there's little bits of like green and brown and pops of blue. I just love it. I'm really quite happy with this little project. I weighed it when I was finished, and it only took about 30 grams of yarn, so I have a ton of this yarn left, and I think I'll be showing it to you later in the podcast. So that's my beret. Again, the pattern is beret. I'm sure it's from More Last Minute Gifts. more last minute knitted gifts. Did I say that right? Regardless. It's also a plain pattern that you can find for free on Ravelry by Pearl Soho. Again, they have a lot of great basic patterns. I love their aesthetic. A lot of just sort of simple classic knits. It's a great place to look for beginner patterns or just plain patterns if that's what you're hankering for, like a beret. The other project that I've just finished sort of in the last couple weeks is the Sharon Shawl. Now, I'm not always one for a make-along. I love the idea of a make-along. I want to be part of the action. I don't like being left out. I like the thrill of going through my stash and picking out yarns, or purchasing just the right skein to add to my collection to make sure that I have all the yarns that I want for a project. But I'm also the kind of person who likes to know what they're knitting before they knit it. I like to sort of have an idea of what I'm getting into. And so sometimes I'm a little bit hesitant about make-alongs. But this one was, I don't know, it just kind of spoke to me. The pattern itself, before it came out, Casapinka, who's the designer of the Sharon Shawl, was very clear that it was a rectangular shawl. It was for beginners or advanced beginners, and I thought, well, I have some experience knitting, but this sounds like fun. It should be some simple knits, maybe some challenging stitches that I've never seen before. I had a look at some of her other designs, and I thought, well, most of her stuff looks very appealing to me. And so I joined, and I'm so glad that I did. This knit along was a joy. Every week there was a funny clip with stories about Sharon from Security, who is Casapinka's cat. Hilarious. Every week there was a recipe for a cocktail. This knit along spoke to me, y'all. So this is my Sharon Shawl. Let me get you at the beginning. In the beginning, I chose 4 yarns from my stash that have been lingering for a long time. I have a bad habit. I have a habit of purchasing yarns, single skeins at a time, with no big intention for them. But I was really happy to be able to go into my yarn and pick out, or my stash, and pick out a few yarns that I thought would be great for this knit along. I used 2 skeins of Sweet Georgia Cash Luxe cashmere with a bit of sparkle. It's this creamy color one, which I think is called Birch. And then this beautiful rich brown that's called Mink. Oh, it's beautiful. Then I needed a couple of contrast colors. Sharon from Security suggested no variegated yarns, and I do have some variegated yarns, but I also have some solids. I chose this really sort of rich tealy color. It's a Woolmeise skein. Woolmeise is the yarn that just keeps on giving. The skeins are 150 grams, and so let me tell you, you get a lot of bang for your buck in that yarn. The other yarn that I have is this pink from a homespun house. It was a part of her Harry Potter yarn club a number of years ago, and this is called the High Inquisitor, which is named after the oh, what's her name? The teacher who comes in to take over from Dumbledore, who has a love of pink and of cats. In the end, I was just delighted to knit this shawl. There are a lot of different sort of stitches that I had never done before, and some old favorites, like, oh my god, give me a feather and fan old shale, and I am a happy camper. Is that weird? I just love it. So in the end, I have this beautiful, beautiful shawl slash scarf that I think is quite lovely. It's a great size. The drape of the fingering weight is lovely. I'm really happy with the yarns that I used, and I'm quite delighted with this project. I believe it's going to go on my gift pile for this Christmas, and I think I know who might be the lucky recipient of this beautiful shawl. I'll let you know how that goes. So that's all my finished objects for this week. So what have I been working on? Color work. I've been working on some more sort of small neckwear. I have a thing for neckwear. Does anyone else have a thing for knitting things that go along their neck? I have a lot of shawls and cowls and scarves. But are they just the best thing ever? So currently I'm knitting a cowl. This is called the Pardus, P-A-R-D-U-S cowl. It's designed by Sweater Freak. And not only do I have a thing for neckwear, I have a thing for animal print. Isn't that amazing? I was knitting this pattern and my 11-year-old daughter said, "How did you do that? Is that animal print? That's so cool." She is correct. It is so cool. It's basic color work. And I love it. I just love it. This pattern is knit as a great big tube that I will seam together in the end. As you can see, I have a provisional cast on there. It's all going to get seamed up and it's going to sit beautifully around my neck. And I will look very chic and elegant and cozy. And I'm really looking forward to it. The yarn I'm using is called Drops Nepal, partly because it's a very affordable yarn. It's a yarn that has merino wool and alpaca in it, so it's quite cozy. This one is knitting to a fairly dense gauge, but also it had just the right colors. That camel, a rich camel color can be difficult to find, and I'm really quite happy with this one. And then I was sort of torn as to whether I would do the animal print in black or a dark gray, but I ended up using the black and I'm quite happy with how that turned out. Although I still stand by the fact that I think a dark gray would look fabulous also. And so this is a little something I'll be working on. And in the end, it may or may not go in the gift pile, depending on how fabulous it looks on me. The last thing I have on my needles today, it's not in this bag, it's in this bag, are a pair of socks. I knit a lot of socks, and I knit a lot of socks for the people in my life. Whether or not they want them or wear them tells me whether or not they get another pair of socks, to be honest. So I mean, I have knit and knit socks. Sometimes I'll be at my sister's house and she'll be wearing these socks and I'll be like, I have no recollection of knitting those socks, but obviously I did because I have no idea who else would have knit them. So I've knit so many socks, I've forgotten all the socks that I've knit. Regardless, there are people in my life who wear my hand knit socks and they wear them out. My husband is one of them. He wears my hand knit socks a ton and I love it. It makes me so happy to see him wearing the socks that I've made him. So this year, I'm making him some socks for Christmas. I had pulled out 3 skeins of mustache yarn in some of their Star Wars colorways. And she does great Star Wars colorways, let me tell you. So he could choose from Boba Fett, Lando Calrissian, and R2-D2. And he chose Lando. Good choice, let me tell you. Both actors who played this, suave, handsome, charming, funny. So this is sock number 1. I like to knit my self-striping yarn socks in a great big tube, and I will go in and cut in an afterthought heel after the fact. I like doing it this way because it allows the colors to just continue uninterrupted, and then when I throw the heel in, the color stripes stay the same. If you were to put in like a heel flap and gusset, the stripe widths can change, and depending on the width of the stripe, that can be quite noticeable or not very noticeable. I have some plans to do some sort of research into different types of top-down heels that will affect the stripes less. One of my favorite books is Knitting Vintage Socks. It's right over there, that's why I'm looking. Knitting Vintage Socks, and in that book, it has excerpts from some very, very old knitting magazines called Weldon's. Weldon's was a publication from the late 1800s that women in Britain could purchase or subscribe to, and there was sections about knitting or crochet or various different home crafts, handwork that you would do. Anyway, through the series there are a number of different types of heels. The heel that I use most when I do my top down heel flap and gusset is just straight, like a gusset heel with a heel flap with a rounded heel, and then the gusset. But there are a number of different kinds in that book that I'm thinking that I'm going to try to see if there is one that I like better or fits better. I sort of get in a rut with my socks and I knit them the same way all the time. So I kind of thought maybe it might be a good time to just experiment, to try some different things. This sock will get an afterthought heel, but my next pair of socks, I think I'm going to experiment with some top-down heels. We shall see. So as I said, the main color I'm using is Lando by Mustache Yarns, and they're perfect match, must match sock base. And my contrast color is my favorite gray. This is Sheepy's Metropolis. Oh, it's a very, very shiny tag. Sorry, Sheepy's Metropolis, and the colorway is Warsaw. Who knew Warsaw was the perfect gray for me? It's this light gray. It's got hints of like lavender in it, and it just seems to pair well with almost everything. So I had bought a few skeins of this to use as the border of a crochet granny stripe blanket, and it was just the perfect gray. So I went back to the yarn store and I bought more because I thought this is something that I need to invest in. So I have this skein and I have 2 more skeins in my basement, and when I run out of those, I'm gonna go buy some more. Love it. And those are my Christmas socks for my husband. And that's all the things I have on the needle right now. But I have some plans. As I said, I finished the Sharon Shawl, which I shared with you. Who doesn't love a little bit of alliteration? Anyway, as a continuation of that make-along and to keep the fun going, Casa Pinka came out with a new pattern. This pattern is called the Secret Handshake Cowl. And this is another make-along. It's going to go for 4 weeks. The new clue came out today, the first clue. So I'm going to be casting that on later today. And I'm going to be using some yarns which you may have seen before on this podcast, my very first podcast. So one of the colors I'm going to use is this ball of Gatekeeper. This is what I made my beret out of, and I think that this cowl and my beret would be pretty cute. I'm also going to use this full Liza, which you saw in my Sharon Shawl. The Sweet Georgia Cashlucks in mink. So pretty. And then the rest of this little ball of pink, which is High Inquisitor, again dyed by Homespun House. So I think the 4 of those together, if my hands can handle them all, will make a really nice cowl. And I look forward to casting that on later today. So that is some future knitting for me. Now, this is my very first episode, and I'm very happy to be telling you about a yarn festival that I just recently went to. Yes, this is 2020. Yes, this is COVID times, but luckily for me and for local dyers, knitters around here, a very small, very lovely fiber festival happened last weekend. It was September 19th on a Saturday. It went from 11 till 4 in a small town called Lacombe, which is about an hour's drive away from where I live. And it happened in a small community hall. It was very, very well organized. The organizers took their time to spread out the vendors. There was maybe 24 vendors, 30 vendors. There weren't a lot of people in the hall. My friend and I drove down early. We picked up a coffee, hit the road, did a little Thelma and Louise, and drove down to Lacombe. We were there a little bit early, and the organizers were very smart about only letting in a few people at a time. So they would let in about 24 people and let them shop for a little while, and then they'd let in a few more people to let the space allow for all of the people that were there, to allow the vendors and the shoppers to have space, which I appreciated. My friend and I wore our masks. A lot of the vendors wore their masks. There was hand sanitizer at a lot of the vendors, at the exits, at the entrances. It was very well organized, and it was so lovely to be around other knitters, to be able to meet yarn dyers, and just to feel that little bit of normal again. It was so great. There was a lot of vendors there, people vending fiber for spinning, which is not something that I have tackled yet in my life, my crafting life, but there was a lot of hand-dyed yarn. There were bag makers. There were some potters. There was a little group called the Alberta Crankers. They are a group of knitters who have circular sock machines, and so they were demonstrating how those work. Okay, so let me tell you, do any of you have circular sock machines? I am pretty interested. Like, I kind of want one, but I'm not sure if I do. Do you know what I mean? Like, I do like knitting socks, but I think if I had a circular sock machine, I could crank out a bunch and then just knit the toes, heels, and cuffs, which would be great. But they're a little bit fiddly, so there's a learning curve. But they're also mechanical, and I kind of like tinkering with things. Like, give me a set of Lego and I'm a really happy camper. I know, I'm a grown-up, but I love it. So I'm sort of torn. It was really, really great to be able to be in a place where I could ask questions and see how the circular sock machines work. The woman that I met was using I cannot remember the name of the circular sock machine she was using, but it was from 1880 and it was working great. And it was really fun to watch her, who I mean, she's obviously very knowledgeable. She knows what she's doing. She's very practiced. It was really great to see somebody who knows what they're doing working on a circular sock machine. So I'm still torn. I'm thinking about it. If you are the type of person who knows a lot about circular sock machines, leave a message. I'm intrigued, and I'd love to know more about it. Do you have one and you use it a ton? Do you have one and you never used it? I love the idea of a really old one. But I love the idea of a really old one that's been refurbished and works really well. So I'm both handy and a bit of a princess. Maybe that tells you a lot about myself. But anyway, let me get to what I got at the Prairie Fiber Festival in Macomb. The first place my friend and I stopped was a pottery booth. Okay, now, is there something about knitters and pottery, or is it just pottery in general? Just beautiful. This table had, I'm sorry, I should tell you the vendor's name, Shelley's Artistry Co. Here's her card, if you want to seek her out. She had a table of like little notions dishes, as well as yarn bowls, and then she had all these mugs. I just love it. The only problem with this beautiful, beautiful mug is that I have a lot of mugs. My mug cupboard is like overflowing, and my husband will probably not be super impressed by the fact that I have another one to add to my collection, but oh my lord, isn't it beautiful? I'm really, really looking forward to using it. So that was my first purchase. Then I think it was like the next vendor over was Wool Baron. Wool Baron, the Wool Baron, is a vendor from Calgary. Calgary is a city that's about 3 hours south of Edmonton. It's also in Alberta. And she dyes beautiful tonal or rich colored yarns. She also dyes self-striping yarn. So my friend and I both fell in love with this beautiful DK yarn. It's called her Everything But Socks DK. Love it. It's 100% 17 micron superwash merino. Is it not beautiful? Now the other thing you should know about me is I'm a sucker for a great yarn name. Like, this is a beautiful colorway. I think we can all agree. But when you find out it's called Dude, I Spilled My Wine, I'm surprised I didn't buy more of it. And then when we were talking to the dyer, she said, actually, I was going to call it Dude, I Spilled My Effing Wine, but I didn't think that was appropriate. I love her even more. So here it is. 3 skeins of a beautiful DK yarn. Now, in like true confessions, my friend bought the exact same yarn. She also bought 3. We may both be knitting a Love Note sweater out of this. Love it. I'm so excited to do that. Also, in the interest of true confessions, that this would be my second Love Note sweater. I've already knit one. I knit it in fingering weight mixed with Surrey alpaca silk. It's beautiful and I love it. So do I want the same sweater knit twice? Maybe not. So my thoughts for this Love Note are, I have a couple. One, I saw a version on Instagram of a Love Note with no lace. It was just simply plain. Really pretty, really elegant. Then I was like, I'm a knitter. I know what I'm doing. I could change the lace. Because this is a pattern that is knit from the top down, I immediately thought of this series of books by Wendy Bernard. This is one of them, Japanese Stitches Unraveled. Just 2 others, which of course I have. We have Up, Down, All Around, Stitch Dictionary, and I have the Knitting All Around Stitch Dictionary. The reason I thought of these books in particular is that Wendy Bernard went through the trouble of figuring out how to chart and work lace patterns that look the same whether you're working them for the top down or the bottom up. Because Love Note is a top down sweater, I want to be able to find a lace pattern that I like that will look good when you look at it as I'm wearing it, which means that it'll be upside down as I'm knitting it, because I'm knitting it from the top down. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time today, tomorrow, in the next little while, checking out lace stitch patterns that might work as a variation of a Love Note. Perhaps a love text message. We shall see. So that's my plan for that. The other yarn purchase that I got from Wool Baron again, I told you she does self-striping yarn. This is some self-striping. As you can see, it's got some pinks, some browns, grays, kind of a limey green color, a cream. And it's called She Can Cuss Like a Sailor. I told you I was a sucker for a good yarn name. So good. So some self-striping yarn for some self-striping socks that would be in my future. And lastly, the last skein of yarn I got, again, my friend and I got the same. Honestly, this yarn is called Dandelion Lace. It's dyed by a dyer called Lily and Pine. Now this is someone I've met before. I had met her at a Knit City in Vancouver previously. And her yarn colors are just fabulous. I really encourage you to check out her website, Lily and Pine. Her colors are fun. They're just fun. She uses a ton of really bright sort of neon pops on top of more subdued colors just to create great palettes. Check out her website. She has some kits for Stephen West's Slipstravaganza, which I have been talking myself out of because I don't need more yarn, but check her out. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. So this is Surrey alpaca silk. It's called Ballet Slippers. And I'm going to knit a Birds of a Feather shawl. It's going to be a knit along I'm going to do with my friend. We do this a lot. We'll use yarn that we have, or we'll like the same project. So we'll have our own knit along, just the 2 of us. But if you joined, I wouldn't mind at all. I have these 2 skeins of yarn that have been sitting in my stash for a little while now. These are La Vienne May. And the colorway is called Reunite. This was part of the Tits Out Collective. It was a fundraiser yarn that was done a couple of years ago now. And I bought 2 of them because as much as I like to use yarn from my stash, I'm also a sucker for a fundraiser. If you're raising money for a cause that I believe in, I will probably buy your yarn because I like to feel like I'm contributing in some way and I'm getting beautiful yarn. So these 2 plus this, I think will make a very pretty birds of a feather shawl. And I'm looking forward to knitting that with my friend. I'll let you know when we're starting. Maybe you'd like to join me. If you have some yarn lying around your house too. So those are the things that I have on the go right now. I have a couple more things that I sort of think I'm going to start knitting on a whim. Do you ever stand in front of your stash and look at what you have and go, oh yeah, that's great, I should knit that right now. Now's the time I should knit it. That happened to me this morning as I was getting ready to make this podcast. So I have a skein of Christmas themed sock yarn that I would like to cast on soon. I watched this Stranded podcast with Amy Florence. I love her. She is an absolute delight. I am constantly in amazement at her ability to dye yarn, her ability to just tear through life with joy and abandon and to tackle things by herself that a lot of people would be really scared to do. She's living in Scotland, far away from her family. She's basically renovating a house single-handed. Okay, she's probably not single-handed, but she's doing so many things and I'm so proud of her, and I wish that it actually inspires me to want to do more things myself. Anyway, Amy Florence, the inimitable Amy Florence, is having a festive sock along, that's what she calls it, knitting Christmas socks. And I thought, well, I'm sure I have sock yarn. Oh, I just realized it's Wool Baron. I have a thing. Okay, so this is Wool Baron sock yarn. I got it at the Edmonton Fiber Frolic last year, and it is called The Ugly Sweater Party. Come on, nothing says Christmas festive more than an ugly sweater party. So I think those will be some very fun Christmas socks paired with my Sheepies Metropolis Warsaw colorway. For some heels, heels, cuffs, and toes. It is incredibly hard to say, and you don't realize how hard it is to say until you try and say it yourself. Regardless, some Christmas socks, and maybe I'll be brave and try a new sock heel from my book. I'll let you know how it goes. And I think that I've come to the end of my podcast. At least there's nothing left on my pile to talk to you about. I'd like to thank you so much for joining me today. I've really, really enjoyed talking to you. And I hope that you've enjoyed spending a little bit of time with me. I hope that you'll take some time to like and subscribe to this podcast so we can meet again in a couple weeks. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Do you like knitting the things that I've been knitting? Are you interested in a birds of a feather shawl along? Yes? No? Let me know. Let me know what you're knitting. If you're gift knitting, like I'm gonna be gift knitting. Are you knitting all the socks? Are you liking the sweater knitting? Are you also a sucker for yarns with clever names? Complete sucker. Anyway, thanks so much for joining me. I hope that in the next little while you find time to do the things that you love to do. I plan on knitting a lot. Goodbye.